I'm Susan Walker, 53 years old, and I've lived what most people might call a picture-perfect life. Married for over 30 years to Michael, a successful businessman. We have a beautiful house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Our children have grown up and moved out, leaving me with an empty nest and a lot of time to reflect. From the outside, it looks like I have everything anyone could ask for: a stable marriage, financial security, a lovely home. But in reality, I've felt a deep loneliness for years. Michael's work demands keep him away from home most of the time, traveling for weeks on end. The first few years of our marriage were filled with passion and excitement, but now the spark is long gone. We've become like business partners, sharing responsibilities but living separate emotional lives. I fill my days with errands, household chores, and the occasional coffee date with friends. I've settled into a routine that feels safe but lacks joy. One bright, sunny morning, I headed to the local grocery store, my usual Thursday ritual. I enjoy grocery shopping because it's one of the few moments when I can escape the monotony of home. As I pushed my cart through the aisles, I noticed a young man standing by the fruit section. He had an easy confidence about him, casually tossing an apple in his hand. He looked to be in his mid-20s, with dark, wavy hair and a smile that could light up a room. Our eyes met briefly, and he flashed me a grin so genuine it took me by surprise. I felt an unexpected flutter in my chest, something I hadn't felt in years. I quickly looked away, embarrassed by my reaction. But as I continued shopping, I couldn't help but glance back at him. He was talking to an elderly woman, helping her reach something from the top shelf, and the kindness in his gesture made me smile. I didn't expect anything to come of this fleeting moment, but I felt something shift inside me, like a tiny spark had been ignited. It was just a smile from a stranger, but it made me realize how starved I was for warmth and genuine connection. I finished my shopping, telling myself it was just a silly moment and nothing more. Little did I know, this was only the beginning. The following week, I found myself at the grocery store again, even though I didn't really need anything. I told myself it was just a habit, but deep down I knew the truth. I was hoping to see him again. It felt ridiculous, almost juvenile, to be this excited over a simple smile from a stranger, but I couldn't deny the tiny thrill it gave me. As I wandered aimlessly through the aisles, I spotted him again. This time, he was in the dairy section, comparing 2 cartons of milk. My heart did a little flip, and I caught myself smiling before I even realized it. He noticed me standing there, and his face lit up with recognition. He gave me a friendly nod. "Can I help you decide which is better?" I joked, stepping a little closer. I couldn't believe how easily the words slipped out of my mouth. I felt like a teenager, flustered and eager, yet I didn't want to walk away. He laughed, a deep, warm laugh that made me feel at ease. "Actually, yes," he said playfully. "I'm stuck between almond milk and oat milk. Which would you recommend?" I felt my cheeks warm. "Depends on what you're using it for," I replied, trying to sound casual. "But if you ask me, oat milk is smoother." He put the almond milk back on the shelf, still grinning. "Oat milk it is then. I trust your judgment." I introduced myself, feeling a little silly for making small talk in a grocery store. "I'm Susan," I said, extending my hand. "Hi, Susan." "I'm Ryan," he said, taking my hand in a firm but gentle grip. He held it just a second longer than necessary, and I felt a jolt of something, electric almost. We stood there chatting for a few minutes, exchanging pleasantries about the weather and the small-town life. It was light and simple, yet there was an undeniable chemistry, a connection I hadn't felt in years. He seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say, making me feel seen in a way I hadn't experienced in a long time. Just as I was about to walk away, he asked, "Do you live around here?" I hesitated, surprised by the directness of his question, but I nodded. "Yes, not far from here, actually." "Maybe I'll see you around again then," he said, his eyes lingering on mine for a moment longer. As I left the store, my hands trembling slightly on the cart handle, I couldn't stop smiling. I felt silly, giddy even, like a young girl with a crush. It was just a brief conversation, but it was enough to brighten my entire day. For the first time in years, I found myself looking forward to something outside of my monotonous routine. I realized then that it wasn't just about Ryan. It was about feeling noticed, feeling alive again. It was a small but significant reminder that maybe I wasn't as invisible as I'd thought. And just like that, a part of me started to wake up, yearning for more. Over the next few weeks, I found myself at that grocery store far more often than necessary. A bag of apples here, a loaf of bread there. It became my excuse to linger, to see if I might run into Ryan again. It was absurd, really, how easily I could convince myself that I needed something. But every time I saw him, my pulse raced, and I knew there was no denying it anymore. I was drawn to him in a way I couldn't quite explain. One afternoon, as I browsed the flower section aimlessly, I felt a presence beside me. I looked up, and there he was, holding a bouquet of daisies. "These look like they could use a home," he said with a grin. I laughed, feeling my face flush. "You're getting flowers for yourself?" He shook his head. "No, I'm not that self-absorbed. Actually, I thought maybe you'd like them," he said, extending the bouquet toward me. I blinked, taken aback. "For me? Why not?" he said with a playful shrug. "I thought you might like a little sunshine today." My heart melted a bit right there. It was such a simple gesture, but it made me feel special in a way I hadn't felt in ages. I took the flowers, trying to hide how much it meant to me. "Thank you, Ryan. That's very sweet of you." We left the store together, standing awkwardly for a moment in the parking lot, not wanting the conversation to end. I realized then that I was craving this. Our chats, the way he looked at me like I was the only person in the room. It was intoxicating. "Are you busy right now?" he asked suddenly, his voice a little softer, almost tentative. I hesitated, caught off guard. "No, not really." "Why?" "There's a little cafe down the street," he said, nodding in its direction. "Would you like to grab a coffee?" "I'd love to keep talking if you're up for it." I knew I should say no. I could practically hear my mother's voice in my head, reminding me of how it would look, an older woman like me, sitting in a cafe with a young man. But I didn't care. For the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of excitement, the thrill of doing something just for me. "I'd like that," I said quietly, meeting his gaze. The cafe was small and cozy, the kind of place you could lose hours in without realizing it. We found a table by the window, and as we settled in with our drinks, the conversation flowed effortlessly. We talked about everything. His classes, my travels, the mundane quirks of daily life that somehow seemed fascinating when shared with him. At one point, he leaned in closer, his fingers brushing against mine on the table. It was such a subtle touch, yet it sent shivers down my spine. I caught my breath, feeling the intensity of the moment, the unspoken acknowledgement that this was no longer just a friendly chat. "I have to say," he murmured, his eyes locked on mine, "you're not like anyone I've met before, Susan. There's something different about you. I can't quite put my finger on it." My heart pounded in my chest. No one had looked at me like that in years, with genuine interest, as if I were fascinating and mysterious. I felt like a woman again, not just an aging wife or a faded photograph of who I used to be. "Maybe it's because you're seeing a side of me that even I've forgotten," I admitted softly, feeling vulnerable but strangely at ease with him. Ryan's gaze softened, and he gave me a small, knowing smile. "Well, I like what I see." It was in that moment, as we sat there in the soft light of the cafe, that I realized I was falling for him. It was absurd, it was reckless, but it was real. And I knew deep down that this was just the beginning of something I hadn't felt in decades, a spark that could easily turn into a flame that I couldn't stop thinking about that day at the cafe. It was like a scene from a romantic movie I'd never believed I'd be part of. Me, a 53-year-old woman, feeling giddy like a teenager after a first date. The logical side of me was screaming, telling me this was inappropriate, that I was risking everything for a fleeting fantasy. But my heart had different ideas, and for the first time in a long while, I found myself wanting to listen. I tried to push the thoughts away, to focus on my routine and the comfort of my predictable life. But everywhere I went, there he was, in my mind, in the corners of my vision, a ghost of possibility haunting me. I'd see a young couple laughing together on the street, and feel a pang of longing, imagining it was us. I'd catch my reflection in the mirror, and see a woman who was beginning to look alive again, a sparkle in her eyes that had been missing for years. It terrified me. What was I doing? What was I thinking? I was married. I had a life built on decades of commitment, stability, and shared memories. And yet, when my husband was home, sitting across from me at dinner, it felt like I was eating with a stranger. We spoke, but the words were empty, a hollow echo of what we once had. There was no spark, no connection. I couldn't remember the last time he'd looked at me the way Ryan did, with genuine interest and admiration. One evening, I found myself alone in the living room, staring out the window at the garden, the sun setting in a wash of pink and gold. I clutched the bouquet of daisies Ryan had given me, now dried but still vibrant in my eyes. The memory of his touch, the warmth of his gaze, filled me with a rush of emotions I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years: desire, excitement, a hint of forbidden joy. And then the fear hit me, sharp and sudden like a wave crashing over a rocky shore. What if someone found out? What would my friends think? What would my husband say? I could already hear the judgmental whispers, the cruel remarks about a desperate woman clinging to her youth. I felt nauseous, the weight of societal expectations pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. But then, I remembered the way Ryan had made me feel that day. The way he had listened to me, really listened, as if every word I said mattered. The way his fingers had brushed against mine, so gentle yet filled with promise. It was a small moment, but it felt monumental in my life. I couldn't remember the last time I felt so seen, so desired. I knew I was on the brink of something dangerous, something that could shatter the life I'd built. But I also knew that if I turned back now, I'd spend the rest of my days wondering what if. What if I had taken the risk? What if I had let myself feel, let myself live? I sank into the sofa, covering my face with my hands as the tears began to fall. It wasn't just about Ryan. It was about everything I'd suppressed for so long. The dreams I'd abandoned. The woman I used to be before life became a series of routines and obligations. I wasn't just falling for a younger man. I was falling for the possibility of reclaiming a part of myself that I thought was gone forever. As I wiped my tears, I made a decision. I was going to see him again. I needed to know if this was real, if this connection we shared was as profound as it felt. It was reckless, it was risky, but I didn't care anymore. For once, I wanted to do something that scared me. I wanted to feel alive. I didn't plan on inviting him over that day. It just happened. Or maybe deep down I knew exactly what I was doing. It was a quiet Friday afternoon. The sky was a soft blue, the kind of day that feels like a blank slate, full of promise. My husband had left early for a business trip, a last-minute change that left me alone for the weekend. The house felt too big, too empty without anyone in it. I was restless, unable to focus on my usual tasks, so I decided to spend some time in the garden. As if on cue, there he was, Ryan, trimming the hedges with that easy confidence of his, like he owned the place. I watched him from the kitchen window for a moment, my heart racing at the sight of him. I felt like a teenager spying on her crush, and the absurdity of it made me laugh. He must have heard me, because he looked up, a playful grin spreading across his face when he saw me. "Hey, Susan," he called out, waving casually. "You've got a beautiful smile today." I felt the blush rise to my cheeks, and I couldn't help but smile back. "Thank you," I replied, stepping outside. "It's a lovely day, isn't it?" "It is," he agreed, setting down his tools and walking over to me. He was close now, closer than he usually allowed himself to be. There was a spark in his eyes, something that mirrored the chaos swirling inside me. "You look different today. Happier." "Do I?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. I could feel the tension between us, like an invisible thread pulling us closer. "I was just thinking I could use some company." There it was, the invitation, hanging in the air between us. It was the moment of truth, and I held my breath, wondering if he'd take the bait. I could feel the pounding of my heart, the way it echoed in my ears, drowning out everything else. He studied me for a moment, his gaze intense and searching, as if he was trying to read my mind. Then he smiled, a slow, knowing smile that made my knees weak. "Well," he said, "I could use a break. How about that lemonade you promised me last time?" It was such a simple thing, but the way he said it made it feel like so much more. I nodded, unable to trust my voice, and led him inside. The house felt different with him in it. Warmer, more alive. I handed him a glass of lemonade, our fingers brushing as he took it from me. The touch was electric, sending a jolt through me that I couldn't ignore. We sat together on the sofa, closer than ever before. The conversation flowed easily, just like it always did with him. We talked about everything and nothing. The latest news, his classes, the quirky customers at the cafe where he worked part-time. But beneath the words, there was an undercurrent of something deeper, something we both felt but didn't dare to say out loud. He looked around the room, his gaze lingering on the family photos lining the mantel. "You have a beautiful home," he said quietly. "It feels peaceful." "It wasn't always like this," I admitted, surprising even myself with the honesty in my voice. "It used to be full of life, laughter. Now it's just a place to live." He turned to me, his eyes filled with an emotion I couldn't quite place, compassion, understanding, and something else, something more. "I get that," he said softly. "You deserve more than just a place to live, Susan. You deserve to feel alive." I swallowed hard, fighting the lump in my throat. No one had ever said that to me before, not even my husband. It was as if Ryan could see straight into my soul, past all the walls I'd built up over the years. "I do feel alive," I whispered, looking directly into his eyes. "When I'm with you." For a moment, everything stood still. The world outside ceased to exist. It was just the two of us, suspended in a moment of pure, unfiltered emotion. I didn't know who moved first, but suddenly we were closer, his hand gently cupping my cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear I hadn't realized I'd shed. "Susan," he breathed, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Are you sure?" I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I'd never been more sure of anything in my life. The air between us felt charged, like static electricity before a storm. I could feel my heart hammering in my chest, each beat echoing louder than the last. Everything about this moment, this sudden shift in our dynamic, was so foreign, yet it felt like it was exactly where I was meant to be. Ryan leaned in, slowly, as if giving me a chance to pull back, but I didn't. I didn't want to. I was drawn to him, pulled by an invisible force I couldn't explain, one that had been building for weeks but I'd tried so hard to ignore. His lips brushed mine, soft and tentative at first, testing the waters. The brief contact sent a jolt of heat through me, and my hands instinctively found his chest, feeling the warmth of his skin through the thin fabric of his shirt. He deepened the kiss, gently at first, and I responded without hesitation. It felt like a release, like something I hadn't known I'd been holding back for years. All of the loneliness, all of the unanswered yearnings. The kiss was slow, unhurried, but it spoke volumes. His hands moved to my waist, pulling me closer, and I let him, letting go of any doubt, any guilt that had tried to creep in. In that moment, I wasn't a 53-year-old woman with responsibilities and a marriage that had long lost its spark. I was simply Susan, a woman who felt something real for someone who was undeniably far too young for her. But I didn't care. Not anymore. When we finally pulled away, breathless and wide-eyed, the room felt different. He rested his forehead against mine, his hand still gently holding me, as if grounding us both in this surreal reality. "Are you okay?" Ryan asked, his voice hushed, his thumb softly tracing my cheek as if I might disappear if he didn't keep touching me. I nodded, though words failed me. My emotions were all over the place: exhilaration, fear, longing, confusion, but above all I felt alive. More alive than I had in years. The quiet emptiness that had once settled in the corners of my home was gone, replaced by a warmth I hadn't even known I was missing. I felt like I had woken up from a long, lonely sleep. "I never expected this," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "But I don't regret it." Ryan smiled softly, his eyes full of understanding and affection. "Neither do I." The truth of what had just happened lingered in the air, heavy and undeniable. I knew it wasn't just a fleeting moment, a one-time thing. It was something deeper, something real. We sat in silence for a while, my head resting on his shoulder, his arm around me as we both tried to process what had just unfolded. My heart was racing, my mind was spinning, but there was a calmness that settled over me too. For the first time in so long, I felt truly seen. Not as a wife, not as a woman defined by her age or responsibilities, but as me, Susan. I couldn't help but wonder where this would lead. What would happen if people found out? What would my husband say when he returned? But those thoughts were distant now, far from the immediate reality of Ryan's warm embrace and the gentle thrum of my heart against his. This changes everything, doesn't it? I said, breaking the silence. Ryan chuckled softly, the sound warm and genuine. I think it's already changed everything. And in that moment, as I felt his fingers gently brush through my hair, I realized he was right. There was no going back. Whatever this was between us, whatever it would become, it had already started, and I wasn't ready to walk away from it just yet. As the evening unfolded, I found myself lying beside Ryan, his arm draped over me, the weight of the moment still settling around us like the soft shadows in the room. My thoughts swirled, turbulent, yet calm at the same time. I had never expected to be here, in this place with him at this age. But as I lay there, a sense of clarity washed over me. Age, such a strange thing to consider when it comes to love. All my life, I had been told that age mattered, that there were rules about who we should love and when, that certain connections were simply not meant to be. Society had ingrained that belief in me, even when I was too young to fully understand what it meant. But now, at 53, with Ryan beside me, I was starting to wonder, why should age be a barrier to love? Ryan's presence beside me was more than just the physical closeness we shared. It was a reminder that, even in my 50s, I could still feel alive. For so many years, I had felt invisible, trapped in the roles I had to play, wife, mother, businesswoman. But with him, I wasn't any of those things. I was just me. I was Susan, the woman who still had desires, passions, and the ability to connect in a way I thought had been long lost. When we first kissed, all those fears, all those doubts rushed through me. Would people judge us? Would he tire of me, of my age, of the weight of my life? I was no longer the carefree woman I had been in my 20s. My body had changed, my energy had shifted. But Ryan didn't see that. He didn't see me as someone past her prime, someone who had lived a lifetime of experiences. He saw me as someone he wanted, someone he could connect with, someone who made him feel as if he was exactly where he was meant to be. It wasn't just about physical attraction. No. There was something more. A connection that transcended age, background, or the paths our lives had taken. We shared stories, laughed, and even cried together at times. He was genuinely interested in my thoughts, my experiences, and my dreams. With him, I didn't feel invisible or dismissed. I felt valued. And yet, there was the undeniable truth. I was married. I had a life I had built with my husband, who, though often absent, was still my partner. What did all of this mean for my marriage? Was I willing to risk everything for something I had never planned? Something that could unravel my life? I turned to Ryan, his deep blue eyes fixed on me, a calm assurance in them that I envied. "Ryan," I said, my voice shaky, "what happens now? What do we do?" He didn't hesitate. "We take it one step at a time. We don't have to figure everything out right now. We have each other. That's enough for now." Those words, simple yet profound, gave me the permission I hadn't realized I needed. For the first time in years, I felt as though I didn't have to have everything figured out. I didn't have to follow the path that society, or even my own self-imposed expectations had set for me. I could explore this, take a chance, and find out where it would lead. And if it didn't work, I would deal with it when the time came. I knew there would be challenges, of course. The world wasn't kind to unconventional love stories. There would be whispers, judgments, and questions. But there was something so pure about what Ryan and I shared that I couldn't ignore it. The pull was too strong to resist, and I had been running from it for so long that it felt like it was time to stop. As I lay there with him, a sense of peace washed over me. There were no guarantees in life. Nothing about love was ever simple. But in that moment, I realized something important. Love had no expiration date. It didn't care about age or the years between us. What mattered was how we made each other feel, how we brought something into each other's lives that hadn't been there before. And for the first time in a long time, I felt the stirrings of hope. No matter how old I was, I could still embrace love, still learn from it, and still allow it to shape me. Maybe it wasn't what I had expected, but it was real, and it was enough. The morning after, I woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. I could feel the weight of my thoughts still lingering, But there was something lighter about the air today. The house, once so silent and still when my husband was away, now seemed full of possibility. Ryan's presence in my life had turned everything upside down, but for once I didn't feel afraid. For once, I felt like I was living my truth, even if it was still tangled in uncertainty. I spent most of the day reflecting. As I sat in the garden, sipping coffee, I realized how much of my life had been built on expectations. Expectations about who I should be, what I should want, who I should love. But now I had the chance to rewrite those rules for myself. No one else could dictate what happiness looked like for me, not anymore. I knew there were decisions to make. My marriage, for one. Michael had been gone more than he'd been home in recent years. I had been waiting for something that felt like love from him, but I hadn't received it in a long time. The truth was our connection had withered, and I had turned to other sources for the emotional nourishment I needed. But could I end my marriage, throw away years of shared history, just for something new, something uncertain? And then there was Ryan, the young man who had breathed life back into my existence. The man who didn't care about my age, who saw me not for the roles I played but for the woman I was beneath all of it. The woman who still had the capacity to love deeply, to laugh, to feel alive. With him, I didn't have to be anyone else. I could just be Susan, vulnerable, hopeful, and free. The thought of stepping into this new chapter wasn't without fear. But the desire to embrace the love that had come unexpectedly into my life was greater than the fear of what it might cost me. I couldn't ignore the connection we shared. I couldn't let it slip away because of societal expectations or the fear of what others would think. I had spent too many years suppressing my desires, my feelings, and my own happiness. It was time to live authentically. I made the decision to have a conversation with Michael. He deserved the truth, even though it was painful. He deserved to know that I had changed, that I had learned that I couldn't settle for a life that wasn't fulfilling me. Maybe it was too late for us, but I needed to try. And once I did, I would move forward with Ryan, with a heart that was full of hope, ready to explore whatever was ahead. As I prepared for the conversation with Michael, Ryan texted me. He was coming by to help me with the garden again, just like he did every week. I smiled at the message, feeling that familiar flutter in my chest. I wasn't sure where our story would lead, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let fear hold me back anymore. When Ryan arrived, we sat together in the garden, talking about everything and nothing. We shared a quiet moment, the warmth of the sun shining down on us, and I realized then that it didn't matter how old I was, how complicated the world might get. All that mattered was that I had found something real, something worth fighting for. And no matter what happened with Michael or anyone else, I wasn't going to let go of this new chapter. Love was unpredictable, but it was also beautiful. It was messy, it was scary, but it was also worth every moment. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid to chase it. I wasn't afraid to take risks, to follow my heart wherever it might lead. So, I decided to let go of the old rules, the old expectations, and step into a future where love knew no boundaries. And as I looked at Ryan, I knew that this was just the beginning of something extraordinary, something that had already transformed my life in ways I never could have imagined.